Welcome. You're connected to transmissions from the campfire. I am the operator. Our narratives of the odd, the humorous, and the downright horrifying serve to provide a brief respite from the cruel, cold winds of reality, and in turn bring a measure of warmth to those weary souls that just might need it the most. Perhaps then the memories of humanity may live on, if only for a moment. Our original stories, set in the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond, are written by Patrick Quinn Kitson, whose works include short story compilations Night and Day, and the upcoming novels Talented and Pyre. Each transmission is performed and engineered by myself, Daniel Kelley. Tonight, we bring you a tale of discovery. Our sanctuaries provide a seemingly protected retreat from the chaos and turmoil of existence. However, even the places where we feel the safest can harbor unexpected danger just below the surface. And what happens if the very lines between predation and evolution become less distinct than they appear? Now, please, sit back, savor your drink of choice, and enjoy. This is Bubbles. The first time that it fed on one of the pale-skinned, fleshy things in the large stone basin, no one knew that it had. No one even thought that young Tommy McGuinn had gotten into the water of the hot springs pool. Since no body was ever found, his mother, father, and older brother were left to assume the worst without ever knowing of the boy's true fate. They imagined any number of horrific scenarios. That he had been kidnapped or had wandered outside of the fence surrounding the resort's property line, tragically falling victim to the deadly undertow of the nearby river, or that he had been murdered. They knew nothing of the thing beneath their feet. They never knew it was responsible. For untold generations, it had existed in what the original inhabitants had called the Yampa, or Big Medicine, Spring, the fount from which earth-warmed mineral water rolled forth through the many outlets dotting the side of the mountainous ridge that formed the northern perimeter of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. At first the being, was but a function of form. It simply was. But then, movement. It moved. Much later, darker-skinned, fleshy things bathing in the spring's waters arrived. Creatures that had often observed but never fed upon. And finally, stunning changes all around as the soft patter of the darker, quieter, fleshy forms was rapidly replaced with the louder, innumerable, paler-skinned ones that brought explosions and machines and what the being would eventually recognize as railways. Rails ceaselessly rattling the hard ground with the tremors of modern conveyance. Large transports always filling the surrounding area with more and more fleshy things. More noise, always more noise. Widespread electricity arrived by the 1880s so that darkness never again swallowed the valley by night. Electric twilight reigned. For a century or longer, some had noticed the disappearances, but all seemed to assume them to be either the sublime will of a deity or a tragically random act of nature, a lightning strike. Yet, it was the form, the deep force. The nameless, faceless, all but gaseous being, invisible and incomprehensible, that had been able to slip into and out of the maze of dense iron water pipes that connected the subterranean Yampa Spring to the bathing pools of the resort since they first had been installed in the mid-1800s. Partitioned pipes, cut-off valves, and gasket-sealed apertures did nothing to inhibit its ability to smoothly slide along any such space. It was neither liquid nor solid, but something able to reform and reconfigure its foundational essence to suit its need to move. For that drive was something, moving was something, And moving was mostly what it did for the first few years that it was, because it did not know at first. Could not know. Then, after some time that was impossible to comprehend or quantify, it began, very slowly at first, to know things. Before that, it simply was. Now it was, and it moved, and it knew. It wasn't until the summer of 1899 that the 7-year-old son of Marimer and Trudy McGuinn had disappeared. A family trip, with a plan to spend the day eating ice cream between dips in the hot mineral pools, then dinner and a show on Grand Avenue. But freckled-faced little Tommy was there one minute waiting to take a dip in the healing waters provided by the vast underground sulfur-tinged spring, and simply was gone the next. Not a trace. It was neither an act of hatred, nor malice, nor sexual predation by some human perpetrator. It wasn't the modus operandi of a career criminal, nor was it pre-planned. Unknown to his family for the remainder of their lives was the fact that it was simply a tragedy born of opportunity. The opportunity for the form to assimilate something larger than the insectoid life and small rodents that it had done before. When it had fallen upon and enclosed itself around the scared and shivering little boy with the sandy blonde hair, it was, for a fleeting flash, able to connect physically in a way that was stimulating. It did not feel, could not yet feel. But still the very stimulation, the brush against what feeling must be, in and of itself was something new and gave it some goal where before it had possessed none. And so it sought more of the new stimulation, more connection with the physical things that filled the pool during the daylight time. It would retreat to the confines of the slick grottos and branching water arteries that ran beneath the town, sometimes for a year or two, sometimes several years, to commune with the spring. Time was not something it felt, for it could feel nothing. It was eternal for all it understood. It was, it knew, it moved, and it sought. Every few years, when it would emerge from its time among the aqueducts and underground rivers, it sought to assimilate more of the fleshy things in the pools at the mountain base. The second time it sought to commune with the flesh of a human, in the year 1903, it attempted to take two at once, but found it could not. It sought a fleshy thing in the hotter of the two large pools. By this time, the unseen thing in the pool knew that they, the fleshy things, also knew, and moved, and sought. But it had also slowly begun to know that they did that which it could not. For they felt, and it could not. Glenwood's eternal electric twilight, supplanting the night's darkness, shrouded the nearby township when the force had taken the big woman in the striped black and white bathing suit from the hotter pool. She had felt fear and also tremendous pain. It could not feel this directly, but did know through her feelings that this sensation was something new. And it sought the new. It sought to feel. By communion with the fleshy things, it could almost taste the emotions glowing under the surface of their subdermal layers. Almost. A nearby man had reacted fearfully to the sudden disappearance of the woman beneath the waters, and the formless thing from the Yampa Spring had moved to take the man as well. When the creature was still pulling the large woman apart, it formed into a vortexing column of water and pulled the man towards. The shouting man had fled, and without awaiting what the outcome would be, it rapidly completed its absorption of the woman and retreated through the iron pipes back towards the spring. It began to know through assimilating people that the fleshy things called themselves people, and they traveled from the world over to soak in the natural mineral solution that spewed forth from the spring. The very spring that emptied out into the pool where it was treated with chemicals and provided hours of relaxation and leisure to tourists and world travelers alike. The creature would have traveled, if not for an overwhelming preternatural need to regularly commune with the spring, to stay close to the spring. The spring was the source. So it remained, hidden from the world's view, communing with and assimilating what it could, when it could. When once, in the year 1909, it took a local peace officer who was walking by the edge of the pool after breaking up a scuffle between two of the resort's drunken visitors, it had nearly been discovered as the source of the lawman's disappearance. The fleshy things, several watching with horrified minds when he assimilated the lawman, had described the awful sight to the other police who came after. After the pool was temporarily shut down, it knew it had to be more careful, and had retreated again to the spring for 3 years, to hide and to commune. If it was to feed on the fleshy things again, it sought to choose a more suitable, yet less noticeable target. Prey that was less likely to arouse suspicion, like a tourist. For now it knew of such things. The more it fed, the more of their consciousnesses it absorbed, the greater the acquisition rate of its own burgeoning knowledge. It knew much after so many decades, and with this understanding, the closer it drew towards the elusive state of feeling. And now it understood caution. So, from 1909 forward, it never again assimilated a local resident, nor any law enforcement officer. Though the policemen, as it eventually knew to call them, always came to see if they could find the person it had taken soon after it had taken them. But it discovered that people were quick to forget tragedy and even less likely to rectify such issues. It aroused little suspicion so long as it did not take too many at once. They seemed not to be too bothered. By what the humans would describe as the early 1920s, the surrounding community, bolstered by the natural spring, was rapidly developing into an ever-expanding resort area of some renown which filled one side of the narrow stone-walled valley to the other. Being a stopover on the way to some distant place called Aspen did little to deter its growth either. The rare disappearance of a visiting vacationer did not disturb the locals, nor the few local law officers. In the 1960s, a fresh wave of people with novel biochemical signatures flooded into the area, leading to a new boom of population growth. With it, more visitors, more tourists, more communion with the flesh, and most importantly to the now thinking, moving being, more opportunities to sense their feelings, to strive to feel for itself. Foreign-born humans and their warm, easily disintegrated bodies carried chemicals which they themselves assimilated to escape their own feelings, to discard that which the thing sought for its own, the only desire it truly fostered. They used chemicals to throw their feelings away. This was something the deep force pondered, insofar that it could. Yet, with its own development and expanding consciousness came both an increasing need for the being beneath the town to consume more and more of the fleshy things at a faster rate, but also the first outlying pings of something like emotion, something akin to sorrow, born from its only near-constant perception that it was alone, that it could not feel and therefore could not enjoy the process of being alive. And for nearly a century, it had tried in vain to make more of itself, which is to say, it sought to have more than just its own company to keep, something of its own form, of its own kind, to communicate or commune with. Alas, its attempts, such as they were, to create an offspring or progeny were fruitless. It could not divide itself, nor could it create a structurally similar symbiote or identical organic clone. Where it wanted to feel, it could only approximate the sensation of feeling. Ergo, the feelings it sought, its hunger only grew. Not much had changed in the area around the hot springs pool in the previous 70 years beyond the introduction of the interstate that had been greenlit back in '56. More fleshy things at an increased pace, which was helpful for the creature in the pipes. During the decadent decade of disco biscuit divas and drug-drenched dance floors that was the 1970s, it ate and ate and ate some more. One young woman who passed through the area and that it had consumed was revealed by a later meal to be an assumed victim of a notorious serial killer, another odd thing it could now vaguely comprehend, who had traveled through the valley. A human predator using the long road nearby much as the formless being in the warm mineral waters had used the hot springs pool as a hunting ground. The human monster in question had even escaped from the local jail and was of some infamy to the humans. The being had the faintest flicker of what might be called curiosity at the time. Is the human monster like me? Is it alone? Does it feel? Then it returned back to the fabric of time breezing past and its ever-increasing need to feel, to consume. The year that the slow-to-evolve flesh beings finally caught on to the by then voracious appetite the being had for humans and their squishy, succulent emotions was 1992. The thing that had given it away was Bubbles. While it knew much more than it had even a decade before, it was wholly unaware that for many years its expanding mass had taken on some specific physical properties that it hadn't previously possessed, attributes it could not yet fully comprehend. When, by the late 1980s, it would cross between the rubber gasket-sealed apertures through to the resort's bathing pools and seek another tourist to consume, it was generating a small, albeit barely discernible trail of minute bubbles in the stead of its movements. And on that cold December evening, someone had witnessed the bubble trail wriggling under the water's surface, like a sea snake searching for snacks. Falling through frozen air down to earth, raindrops crystallized into new trickling snow above the fog-blanketed waters of the larger swimming pool, while wispy columns of swirling steam vortexes twirled to and fro like mist-made ballerinas along its rippling, emerald-hued surface. The being had already taken 2 people that night, a couple who were not in the pool itself, but rather just outside its borders, making use of the large concrete outlet for the leftover water that was regularly cycled out from the pool's million-gallon-plus capacity shell. A 6-foot in diameter tube jutting out from the hill next to the interstate and steadily depositing into the Colorado River. Using this outlet, locals had formed rocks into bathing pools along the river's edge. The creature had watched from inside the pipe many times, watched humans make sounds and movements which clearly expressed that which it could not yet. Feelings. Once it assimilated its victims' thoughts and memories, it was able to understand that the town's residents called the area the Hippie Dips, because so-called hippies took dips there, though it did not exactly connect with what this meant. And that night, despite having already taken 2, it sought more. One more. For something new had happened. Rushing with the current through the pipe's slick interior, the invisible creature of molecular ambiguity had intellectually glimpsed the precipice of emotional understanding with the devouring of the first hippie's shuddering flesh and fear-drenched mind. Screams and fleeing did not help to prevent it from wrapping unseen yet impossibly strong pressure around the second hippie, crushing and instantly reassimilating its carbon structure, depleting the cellular fuel and expelling skyward the faint mist of exhausted molecular refuse. The byproduct was invisible. What it had experienced through the immediate assimilation of the second hippie was something new. It was new and it was good. It was almost like feeling. Now, it sought to commune with a third human and perhaps finally partake of that one limit to its existence. But then, them old Bubbles. The deep form had returned through the cavernous tubes that connected the river outlet to the resort's larger network of plumbing running beneath the concrete vessels, and entered the smaller hot pool where jets of foaming water often masked its approach. However, no jets churned the waters as it entered from the easternmost bottom drain. The deep thing from the Yampa Spring could sense only one body in the water. It did not hesitate. Perhaps that was its initial folly, and the moment it crossed the line with the human beings. It made hasty work of the small, screaming child, and after so many years of seeking and feebly attempting in vain to attain, it finally tasted what fear was. And it was, to the thing's admittedly virginal palate, if you will, obviously, terribly delicious. Not because it was good, but because the feeling of it was real. For once, it was as the humans were. Lasting a mere second or two in reality, it might have been a lifetime to the creature. This emotion, this fear, was something it wanted more of. Despite fear being something the humans thought of as a negative, the being from below could not have enjoyed its first shock of what it was to feel any more than it had. A vibrant arc of reddish-hued emotion ran through its formless link of molecules and thoughts. If this is bad, then how good is good? The child in the hot pool was ultimately the last thing it ever assimilated. The humans had realized at long last that something was rotten in the state of Glenwood Springs. Someone or some creature was killing off visitors to the area at what should have been an alarming rate. But only alarming if you knew it was happening. which before they had not, and now they did. A lifeguard, shouting and running alongside the pool, had watched and pointed at it as it dragged the child down and structurally dismantled the fearful young boy on a molecular level within 30 seconds. Just before that, the lifeguard had caught sight of the bubbles heading along the surface of the water, cascading up, when the creature had taken the boy and begun to commune with him. The guard of life knew something else was down there. The unseen thing slipped down the bottom drain of the smaller hot pool just as several bodies dove into it to try and save the now disintegrated and vanished victim to no avail. But the thing was now known to them, and they wanted it gone for good. The initial strategy that the human creatures feebly employed in an attempt to rid themselves of its presence was to drain the whole million-gallon pool to try and flush the entire system. The creature from the spring had simply returned to the cavernous source of the nourishing mineral water to avoid their actions, and had waited days before checking out the pipes again. They remained empty. After that, they had applied a large amount of vacuum pressure to the entirety of the pipe network to remove any living thing that might have been able to scurry up into the system. Perhaps they suspected it was one of the other organic creatures that had decimated the other humans in the pool. During this process, the resulting suction was immense, yet easy enough for the being to avoid, shifting into a long sheet of atoms as it slithered away from the draw of the vacuum source. It had clung to the walls, then returned again to the spring. The being suspected that the efforts would cease then, as they had so many times before. But with this, the humans seemed resolved to vanquish it. It had felt something like, though ultimately impossible to qualify as, anger, when it learned from listening through the webwork of pipes that the local humans had been discussing a way to purge the entirety of the system with a mixture that would likely extinguish any and all trace of whatever it came into contact with. It could understand their words by the end. It knew what they planned for it. And when a day later the viscous, tar-like ooze flooded the pipes, it could feel the fast encroachment of its habitat by the thick substance. For it could perceive, in a way akin to human hearing, the rapid approach of the corrosive chemical concoction created to clear the pipes of all organics as well as inorganics that would normally survive. But it realized, insofar that it could, that it did not want to perish. It did not. Whatever this thought was, it was the closest to an actual emotion that it would ever feel. It was something like the fear it had tasted earlier. But it tasted sour. The sludge expanded inside the pipes in a flash, and the thing had no chance of mustering anything like outrunning this liquid that moved at such speed. Just as the being had entered, filled, and inwardly devoured so many things before it, now did it finally experience the other side of that cruel exchange. The sensation was something comparable to pain, and yet absent that quintessential ability to truly feel, it was just a sense and nothing more to the creature. Before it disappeared from the face of this planet forever, it created one single thought to eternally echo in its consciousness while it faded from our world. Is it better to have been and never felt than to have never been at all? Then it was extinguished, vanquished, removed from the cycle of death and rebirth for all time, known to none, a memory that never existed. Is a monster simply a being whose needs are incompatible with our own survival? The morality of good and evil are uniquely human constructs. A predator harbors no malice, yet the addition of a yearning to evolve brings complexity and meaning. A metamorphosis from mere sustenance to something more, purpose. As ambition transforms necessity into desire, how does one define the line between monster and human? For who amongst us has never done the unthinkable in pursuit of a feeling? Is the spark to feel the very thing that makes us human, after all? Transmissions from the Campfire is produced by myself, Daniel Kelley, and by Patrick Kitson. Tonight's episode was engineered and performed by me, and is a copyrighted work that may not be reproduced or re-uploaded, in part or in full, without express written permission. Bubbles is an original work of fiction written by Patrick Quinn Kitson, creator of the emergent Valley horror genre. More of Patrick's work is available in the short story collections Night and Day, now both available on Amazon and at other booksellers, as well as the forthcoming novels Talented and Pyre. If you enjoyed our time together, you can find more episodes of Transmissions from the Campfire on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your favorite podcast directory. Please subscribe to be notified when each new transmission commences. Now, zip your jacket and cinch your collar tight, as the light of the fire dies down and our power cells are once again depleted. Temporary warmth gives way to the icy bitterness of existence with the return of dawn. Stay safe, traveler, until we meet again around the campfire.